Imagine building a company so valuable that Steve Jobs personally invites you to Apple's headquarters. For almost any entrepreneur, this would be the opportunity of a lifetime. Apple wanted your technology, Apple wanted your team, Apple wanted your company. And when Steve Jobs himself asks to meet you, there's usually only one ending. You sell. But that's not what happened. Dropbox walked away. They rejected one of the most powerful companies on earth. At the time, it looked incredibly brave. Looking back, it may have been one of the biggest gambles in Silicon Valley history, because just months later, Apple launched its own cloud storage service. Soon after came Google Drive. Microsoft entered the race. Overnight, Dropbox found itself competing against companies worth trillions of dollars. Most people assumed the company was finished, and honestly, they had every reason to believe that. But somehow, Dropbox survived. Today, millions of people still trust it with their most important files. The company is worth billions of dollars. Yet its story isn't really about cloud storage. It's about solving one simple problem, a problem that almost everyone experienced. A forgotten USB drive, a missing file, a deadline getting closer. Sometimes, the biggest companies in history aren't born from revolutionary inventions. They're born from everyday frustrations. And Dropbox is perhaps one of the greatest examples. This is the untold story of Dropbox. Before artificial intelligence, before smartphones became powerful enough to replace computers, before the cloud became a word everyone understood, there was a surprisingly simple problem, a problem that almost nobody remembers today. But to understand why Dropbox became one of Silicon Valley's fastest growing companies, we first have to go back to a time when carrying your entire digital life meant carrying a tiny piece of plastic in your pocket. It's difficult to imagine today, but less than 20 years ago, accessing your own files wasn't easy. There was no Google Drive, no iCloud, no OneDrive, no seamless synchronization between devices. If you wanted to take a presentation from your home computer to school, or bring an important document to work, chances are you carried one of these, a USB flash drive. At the time, it felt revolutionary, tiny, portable, convenient, until it wasn't. You forgot it at home, it stopped working. You accidentally deleted your files, or even worse, you spent hours working on the wrong version of a document. It happened to everyone, students, designers, programmers, businesses, every single day. Email wasn't much better. File size limits made sharing large projects almost impossible. If your attachment was too large, you simply couldn't send it. External hard drives solved part of the problem, but they created another. They were heavy, fragile, easy to lose, and they certainly didn't keep multiple computers synchronized. Looking back, it's almost strange to remember just how complicated something as simple as opening your own files used to be. Yet, for millions of people, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It slowed businesses down. It wasted countless hours, and every time someone forgot a USB drive, the exact same thought crossed their mind. There has to be a better way. But here's the interesting part. The technology already existed. Internet speeds were improving. Storage was becoming cheaper. Computers were becoming more powerful every year. So why hadn't anyone solved it? The answer was surprisingly simple. Building online storage wasn't the difficult part. Making it effortless was. Anyone could upload a file. The real challenge was making people forget they were even using cloud storage. It had to feel invisible, almost like magic. And that idea would soon change the internet forever. But the person who finally solved it wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't the CEO of a massive technology company. In fact, he was just another university student, one who kept making the exact same mistake over and over again. Drew Houston wasn't trying to build the next billion-dollar company. In fact, he wasn't trying to build a company at all. He was simply trying to solve his own problem. Born in Massachusetts, Drew had always been fascinated by computers. While most kids spent their afternoons playing video games, he spent his writing software. By the time he was a teenager, programming wasn't just a hobby anymore. It had become second nature. Every new problem looked like something that could be solved with code. That mindset eventually led him to one of the most prestigious universities in the world, MIT. Surrounded by some of the brightest engineering students on the planet, Drew did what many ambitious programmers dreamed of doing. He built things, small applications, experiments, side projects. Most of them went nowhere, but every failed project taught him something valuable. The best ideas weren't always the most complicated. Sometimes they solved the simplest problems. Then one day, something happened that seemed completely insignificant. Drew boarded a bus. He opened his laptop, ready to continue working. And then he realized something. He had forgotten his USB drive again. For most people, that would have been an annoying inconvenience, a wasted afternoon, maybe a few hours of frustration. But programmers tend to see the world differently. They don't just ask, "Why did this happen?" problem? They asked. Why does this problem even exist? Sitting there on that bus, Drew wasn't thinking about USB drives anymore. He was thinking about a much bigger question. Why were files trapped inside individual computers? Why couldn't they simply follow you everywhere, automatically, without thinking, without copying, without dragging folders around, without emails, without flash drives? It sounds obvious today, but in 2007, it sounded almost impossible. Cloud storage already existed in one form or another, but using it felt slow, confusing, unreliable. Drew wasn't interested in inventing cloud storage. He wanted to make it disappear. If people had to think about synchronization, he had already failed. His goal wasn't to build another storage platform. His goal was to make accessing your files feel completely effortless. It was an incredibly ambitious vision, especially for one person, working alone from a small apartment. But what Drew didn't know was that solving the technical problem would actually be the easy part. Convincing the rest of the world would be much harder. Great products don't become successful simply because they're useful. People first need to understand why they matter. And in Dropbox's case, explaining the product turned out to be almost as difficult as building it. So instead of spending millions on advertising, Drew tried something completely different. Building Dropbox was only half the battle. The real challenge was convincing people that they actually needed it. Today, cloud storage feels obvious, but in 2007, the idea sounded strange. Why would anyone store their personal files on someone else's servers? Why trust the internet with your documents when you could simply carry a USB drive? Investors asked the same questions. Potential users did too. Dropbox wasn't selling a faster computer. It wasn't selling a new phone. It wasn't even selling more storage. It was selling a completely new way of thinking, and that made marketing incredibly difficult. Drew quickly realized something. No matter how well he explained Dropbox, people still didn't fully understand it. Because Dropbox wasn't impressive when you talked about it, it was impressive when you experienced it. So instead of creating a complicated presentation, Drew made something much simpler, a short demonstration video. At first glance, it looked surprisingly ordinary. No dramatic music, no expensive production, no flashy visual effects, just a screen recording, a calm voice, and one simple promise: your files everywhere. But what happened next surprised everyone. The video was posted on Hacker News, one of Silicon Valley's most influential technology communities. Within hours, programmers, entrepreneurs, and early adopters began sharing it everywhere. Suddenly, thousands of people wanted access, not because Dropbox had convinced them with advertising, but because the product solved a frustration they already had. Watching the demo felt almost magical. A file appeared on one computer, and seconds later, it appeared on another. Automatically. No emails, no USB drives, no copying folders. It simply worked, and that simplicity became Dropbox's greatest advantage. The waiting list exploded. Tens of thousands of people signed up. Almost overnight, Dropbox had gone from an unknown side project to one of Silicon Valley's most talked about startups. Investors started paying attention. Journalists started writing. Venture capital firms started calling. But success brought a completely different challenge. Building software for a few thousand users is one thing. Building it for millions is something else entirely. Dropbox now had expectations. Expectations it somehow had to meet. Fortunately, one of the most influential startup accelerators in history had already noticed. Silicon Valley has produced thousands of startups, but only a handful become companies that change the world. Dropbox was about to receive an opportunity that could change its future forever. A small startup program called Y Combinator. Success on the internet can happen surprisingly fast. One day, nobody knows your company. A few weeks later, everyone is talking about it. That was exactly what happened to Dropbox. The demo video had done more than attract users. It had attracted something far more valuable: attention. And in Silicon Valley, attention is a currency. Investors began reaching out. Entrepreneurs wanted meetings. Some of the biggest names in technology were suddenly curious about one simple question: who were these guys? But Dropbox wasn't ready. The product worked. The vision was clear. Yet building a global technology company required much more than writing good code. Drew Houston understood that. He needed guidance. He needed people who had already built successful companies. And there was one place where almost every ambitious founder wanted to be: Y Combinator. At the time, it was still relatively unknown outside Silicon Valley, but inside the startup world, it had already begun building an incredible reputation. Instead of investing in large corporations, Y Combinator focused on something far riskier: young founders, bold ideas, tiny teams. The philosophy was simple: give exceptional people just enough money, surround them with experienced entrepreneurs, and let them build. It sounds obvious today, but back then, very few investors believed that a handful of engineers could build companies worth billions. Y Combinator did. Dropbox was accepted into the program, and almost immediately, everything began moving faster. Mentors challenged every assumption. Investors offered advice, founders shared ideas. Every conversation pushed Dropbox a little further. But one lesson became especially important. Building a great product wasn't enough. Growth had to become part of the product itself. Dropbox couldn't afford expensive advertising campaigns. It didn't have Google's budget. It didn't have Microsoft's distribution. Every new user mattered. So instead of buying customers, Dropbox tried something remarkably clever. They rewarded users for inviting friends. Invite one person, get extra storage. Invite another, get even more. It was incredibly simple, yet it completely transformed the company's growth. Suddenly, every satisfied customer became part of Dropbox's marketing team. No television commercials, no giant billboards, just people recommending something they genuinely found useful. Within months, the user base exploded. Millions of people joined. The referral system became one of the most successful growth strategies in startup history. Even today, marketing teams around the world still study Dropbox as one of the greatest examples of product-led growth. It seemed like everything was finally falling into place. Users were growing, investors were happy, the future looked incredibly bright. But then, one phone call changed everything. In early 2009, Drew Houston received an invitation, not from an investor, not from another startup, but from the most influential technology company in the world. Apple wanted a meeting, and waiting inside was Steve Jobs himself. By 2009, Dropbox was no longer just another startup. Millions of people were using the product. Investors believed it could become one of Silicon Valley's next great success stories. But someone else had noticed as well: Apple. At the time, Apple was entering a completely new era. The iPhone had changed the smartphone industry. The App Store was transforming software. And Steve Jobs was already thinking about the next big challenge: keeping people's digital lives connected. Photos, documents, music, everything. Synchronized across every device. There was just one problem. Apple didn't have a product like Dropbox. So, according to multiple reports, Steve Jobs invited Drew Houston to Apple's headquarters in Cupertino. Imagine that for a second. Just a few years earlier, Drew had been sitting on a bus, frustrated because he'd forgotten a USB drive. Now, he was walking through the doors of one of the most valuable companies on Earth. Waiting inside was Steve Jobs. Jobs had built a reputation unlike anyone else in Silicon Valley. He wasn't simply a CEO. He was known for recognizing great products, sometimes before the rest of the world even understood them. If Steve Jobs wanted to meet you, it usually meant one thing: he believed your company mattered. According to people familiar with the meeting, Apple wanted Dropbox. Some reports suggest Steve Jobs presented Dropbox with an acquisition offer. Others describe it as an attempt to convince the founders to join Apple before they became a much bigger competitor. Whatever the exact details, one thing is clear: Steve Jobs saw enormous value in what Dropbox had built. And then something unexpected happened. Drew Houston said no. Think about that. A young founder with a relatively small company turning down one of the most powerful technology companies in history. From the outside, it sounded almost unbelievable, but Drew believed something. Dropbox wasn't just another application. It could become an essential part of the internet itself. Selling the company now meant giving up that vision. It was an extraordinary decision, one that required enormous confidence, or enormous stubbornness, depending on who you asked. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. Saying no to Apple wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the real battle, because Steve Jobs reportedly left the meeting with a warning: "We're going to crush you." Whether those exact words were spoken has been debated over the years, but what happened next left little room for doubt. Apple didn't walk away. Apple built its own cloud storage service, and Dropbox suddenly found itself facing a company worth hundreds of billions of dollars. For many startups, that would have been the end. But Apple wasn't the only giant preparing to enter the market. Within just a few years, Dropbox found itself surrounded. Apple launched iCloud. Google introduced Google Drive. Microsoft expanded OneDrive. Three of the biggest technology companies in history, all competing in exactly the same space. From the outside, Dropbox's future looked almost impossible. So how did it survive? By 2012, Dropbox had achieved what every startup dreams of: millions of users, global recognition, rapid growth. But success had come with an unexpected consequence. The bigger Dropbox became, the bigger the target on its back. Apple had launched iCloud. Google introduced Google Drive. Microsoft continued expanding OneDrive. Suddenly, Dropbox wasn't competing against another startup. It was competing against three of the largest technology companies in history. Companies with billions of dollars in cash, millions of existing customers, and one enormous advantage. Their products were already installed on people's devices. If you bought an iPhone, you got iCloud. If you used Gmail, Google Drive was already waiting for you. If your office relied on Windows, OneDrive was built in. Dropbox had to convince people to install something that its competitors were giving away by default. Analysts began asking the same question: how long can Dropbox survive? It was a fair question. History had shown what usually happened to startups when big tech entered their market. They disappeared, quietly, one by one. Yet Dropbox did something surprisingly unusual. Instead of trying to beat Apple, or Google, or Microsoft, it focused on something they couldn't easily replicate: simplicity. Dropbox worked almost everywhere: Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, iPhone. It didn't matter which ecosystem you preferred, your files were always there. That independence became Dropbox's greatest strength. While the tech giants wanted users locked into their own platforms, Dropbox wanted to work with all of them. And for millions of people, that flexibility mattered. But surviving wasn't enough. Dropbox still needed a way to grow. The company could no longer rely solely on giving people free storage. It needed a sustainable business. So Dropbox slowly began transforming itself. It wasn't just a place to store files anymore. It became a collaboration platform. Teams could share documents, leave comments, recover deleted files, manage projects, work together from anywhere in the world. The company also started acquiring other businesses, expanding far beyond its original idea. Products like HelloSign brought electronic signatures into the Dropbox ecosystem. Gradually, Dropbox stopped competing only in cloud storage. It started competing in workplace productivity. It wasn't as flashy, it didn't make headlines every week, but it worked. Year after year, Dropbox remained profitable. Millions of individuals, hundreds of thousands of businesses, and billions of files continued flowing through its platform every single day. In the end, Dropbox never defeated Apple, it never defeated Google, and it never defeated Microsoft. It did something much smarter. It found a way to survive alongside them. Looking back, it's tempting to measure Dropbox only by its market value, or by the number of users it has today. But perhaps that misses the point entirely. Today, Dropbox is no longer the fastest growing startup in Silicon Valley. It no longer dominates technology headlines, and it certainly isn't the company everyone talks about when discussing artificial intelligence. But perhaps that's exactly what makes its story so remarkable. Because success isn't always about becoming the biggest company in the world. Sometimes, success is simply surviving, especially when the companies trying to replace you are Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Looking back, it's easy to think Dropbox was just another cloud storage company, but that's not what it really built. Dropbox changed something much more fundamental. It changed the way people thought about their files. Before Dropbox, your documents belonged to a single computer. Afterwards, they belonged to you. That sounds obvious today, but in 2007, it was a completely different way of thinking. Many of the services we use every day, from Google Drive to iCloud, and even modern collaboration platforms, owe part of their existence to the path Dropbox helped create. The company didn't invent the cloud. It didn't invent online storage. What it did invent was a better experience. And sometimes, that's all innovation really is. Taking something complicated and making it feel effortless. The irony is almost impossible to ignore. One forgotten USB drive led to one of the most influential software companies of its generation. A small frustration became a billion-dollar business, and a problem that millions of people accepted as normal disappeared. Not because technology suddenly became more powerful, but because one programmer refused to accept that there wasn't a better way. Great companies rarely begin with perfect plans. They begin with curiosity, with frustration, with someone asking a simple question: why does it have to work like this? Dropbox asked that question, and in doing so, quietly changed the internet forever. Thanks for watching.